approach, or we may say a first approach, that is an observational approach that is mainly based on direct measurement of pedestrian activities. And as far as this approach is concerned, you can have obviously several way to collect data on pedestrian. You can carry out manual survey or automatic survey by means of sensor, and obviously more recently we can use data that came available from the widespread use of mobile phones, for example. But this is still obviously an observational approach. Since we are, engineer, we are most interested also in modeling pedestrian activities, and we can obviously find different approach: sketch-based model approach, demand-driven approach that can be further split into macro simulation or micro simulation approach, or we can also find some land use based approach, what is mainly called seamless pedestrian approach, that obviously will is based on relationship between land use parameters and pedestrian activities, or the most, we may say, traditional configurational approach. What are we talking about? Obviously, we're talking about a modeling approach that has been conceived and proposed in late 80 by Hillier, and is based on a relationship between pedestrian activities and the layout of pedestrian path network, introducing the concept related to integration. Integration is a parameter that is able to describe the connectivity level of a road section versus all the other road section that are involved in pedestrian activities. The basic idea that we have dealing with this approach is that maybe we can enrich this configurational approach by adding some additional, we may say, weight parameter, weight factors that are more related to demand-driven approach, that can provide a more accurate and effective prediction of pedestrian activities. So we came up with this proximity weight that is related to the layout of the different traffic analysis zone in the examined area, take into account what we call a typical impedance function, or distance decay function, a function that is obviously providing the probability to choose a specific transport mode, and in this connection on foot transport modes with respect to the other one as a function of the distance of the trips. And we also introduce another additional factor that is related to the presence of commercial activities and shops in the examined area. And on the other side, we also develop an original way to collect data on pedestrian activities by means of a typical moving observer approach. So we just set up a device on a driving car, so the car drive on a specific path by the help, obviously, of mobile phones that were able to record some video camera, and we came up with a survey of pedestrian survey by means of this moving observer approach. And the main advantage of this approach is that you can collect a huge amount of data in a very short period. And we came up with this calibration of the model in our past research efforts in pre-COVID period. And And as you can see, we have a very satisfying, we may say, a relationship between an explanation variables where you can find on the x-axis integration and proximity and shop related factors that is able to predict pedestrian count of several road sections that on which we carry out a pedestrian survey. And obviously, we need to split two main pedestrian traffic scenarios, what we call the weekday typical pedestrian traffic scenario and the pre-holiday traffic scenario, since obviously pedestrian activities may be affected by according to the different day of the week. Um, Once that we have this model, we just wonder how pedestrian behavior has changed due to a pandemic restriction. So we recently repeat the pedestrian surveys by using a moving observer, as you can see here. And these are the investigated pedestrian path that we cover recently in this second survey that we carry out during pandemic period. And the final results that we have that you can see here, here you can see a diagram where we compare pedestrian counts that have been collected in the post-COVID period on the y-axis with the pedestrian counts collected in the same road section in the pre-COVID period on the x-axis. As you can see, there is still a quite good correlation between these two pedestrian traffic scenario, but the slope of this correlation is obviously lower than one, providing the evidence that there was a dramatic decrease of pedestrian activities in the post-pandemic period of about 20% for the typical weekday scenario and of about 40% in the pre-holiday scenario in the blue, whereas the weekdays in red. Um, Another important comparison is between the two models in the post-COVID situation compare versus the pre-COVID scenario. As you can see, this is the comparison for the typical weekday pedestrian scenario, whereas here we can find the same comparison from a pre-holiday scenario. The most important thing that we can highlight from this comparison is that uh, these are very simple model. These are linear model with an intercept and a slope. The intercept is represents some sort of base pedestrian activities. I mean, is the base pedestrian counts that you may find that you can meet even if the explanation variable is zero. And as you can see, there is a reduction of these base pedestrian activities in the post-COVID period, and whereas there is an increase of slope that we may attribute, that we may interpret it as a much more an increased activity towards the commercial activities and shops that are more close to residential area. So just to resuming, constant term seems to have decreased both from weekdays and pre-holiday days, demonstrating reduction of basic level movements of pedestrian activity in the post-pandemic scenario, whereas the slope seems higher for data collected in the post-pandemic period compared with the pre-pandemic, perhaps due to the increased preference of pedestrians to choose commercial activities located close to their residential area. Obviously, other conclusions are that new surveys provide the evidence that proposed model approach is still indeed effective in capturing pedestrian activities. It's believed that this methodology can be a valid help for administrator in order to assess risk related to pandemic and obviously safety. And obviously, further analyses are needed to validate the methodology on other Italian urban areas. And that's all. Thank you, and I'm waiting for your question.
Well, thank you very much, Professor, for the excellent presentation and for keeping the time. I think we have time for a couple of questions. So if anyone would like to ask something, please. Are there any questions? Uh, Vincenzo Torrisi. Okay, you have the floor.
Thank you for your interesting presentation. And I think that the topic is really interesting, especially considering the changes in mobility patterns after in the post-pandemic period. I've got the curiosity just to know in which context did you perform the analysis? Did you choose only urban context or the city center or um, areas with different kind of services?
Thank you, Professor Torrisi, for your very interesting questions. I apologize because I missed to name the site of the investigation, but some of you already understand that I'm referring to the entire city area of Cassino. Cassino is an urban area of about 30,000 inhabitants. And therefore, as you can see, we select a very long path on which we perform this pedestrian surveys in order to have a huge amount of data by which we can calibrate the model. We only investigate on urban areas, not we did not investigate on suburban areas or on rural areas, but obviously we are also planning to do something to investigate in such areas, but obviously the main focus is on urban areas, since in this area there is the higher concentration of pedestrian activities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both for the very productive discussion. Any other questions?
I just curious. Oh. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Just curiosity. If in the future step, are you able to introduce gender and age variable in your research?
Yes, obviously, because as you know, gender will affect the attitude, we may say, to pedestrian activities of a community. And obviously we are planning to at least have to recall to since we have a video recordings, so we are pretty much confident that we can at least estimate some sort of age on data from this video recording, that are high definition video recording. But it's a very you make a very interesting point, since gender and age are perhaps most contributing factor on pedestrian activities. I think that the most important is also to see if this approach will work on another urban areas, because we are just focusing on Cassino. I would be curious to see if other urban area can be candidate for calibrating this such kind of model, because As you can see, this model is not so much complex such as the microsimulation models. Microsimulation is extremely tricky and extremely complex. And we have, the duty to provide some sort of prediction tools that could be more simple to be managed, especially from, administration. That's why we choose this approach. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. I think now we can move to the second presentation of this morning session. The title is The Rise of E-Scooter in Palermo, a SWOT Analysis and Travel Time Study. I would now like to invite Dr. Andreas Nikiforiadis, a colleague of mine at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, to deliver his presentation. Andreas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Let me share my screen. I hope you can see the presentation, right?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay. Okay. I'll try to be as fast as possible for being on time. So, my name is Andreas Nikiforiadis, and I will present you a study that we carried out along with colleagues from 4 different universities. And the presentation is entitled The Rise of E-Scooters in Palermo, a SWOT Analysis and Travel Time Study. Here is a short introduction about the evolution of micromobility systems. This slide mostly refers to bike sharing, since this was the initial, let's say, version of micromobility services, but it also includes, in the most recent generation, the appearance of shared scooters. So, all started with the free bike systems, or white bikes, which in fact was a dockless system that operated in Amsterdam. 50 bicycles were painted white and they were distributed within the city with a total absence of rules. So the first ever micromobility system was a dockless system. Then the business model changed. We had the coin deposit systems with fixed stations, and also then the information technology based systems that sought to provide better services through the collection of data about the rentals and the users. And through this collection of data, the operators aim to manage optimally their fleets and also to protect their fleets from phenomena of vandalism. Now we are in the 4th generation, which is known as demand-responsive multimodal systems. Here we have the e-bikes, the e-scooters, also integration with other transport modes through mobile application. This is something close to mobility as a service. And of course, we have again the dockless systems. So all started with a dockless system, then the business model changed, and now here we go again with the dockless systems. But now the difference is that we try with the aid of technology to prevent phenomena of vandalism and thefts. So micromobility experienced a great growth during the last year. During the last years, you can see in the last figure the increase in the number of bike sharing programs across the world, and an even greater increase, an even greater growth is expected in the next few years, with also the shared scooters that are now dominating in the world. However, this rapid growth and the rapid increase of these systems resulted in several challenges that we all face in the recent cities, like vandalism, public space invasion, and also road safety issues. That's why most countries and most cities are now developing regulations. We can see that in most European countries, e-scooters are equated with bicycles, while in some countries, e-scooters are a dedicated category of vehicle. And also, in most European countries, e-scooters are allowed to circulate in bicycle facilities. Also, from this slide, it is important to note that only in Germany, e-scooters require a license plate. The story in Italy is more or less the same as in the other European countries. The shared scooters arrived at the end of 2019. A rapid increase was experienced during the next 2 years, and that's why Italian municipalities were asked to develop regulations for micromobility, and many municipalities have already do so. Also, more recently, several changes were introduced in the highway code due to the large number of e-scooters in the Italian roads. Based on previous studies in the Italian context, we identify that the most important motivations for using e-scooters are that it is considered a fast mode. It is a very suitable mode for the first and last mile of the trips, as well as because they contribute in the reduction of the emissions. And these are considered to be the most important benefits of shared scooters. On the other hand, the most critical issues is the integration within the urban environment, the irregular parking, the absence of insurance, as well as the weather conditions. Now, going on to our research, the objective of our work is to demonstrate a two-folded strategic tool for improving the operation of micromobility services. On the one hand, we carried out a SWOT analysis for identifying the pros and cons of the operation of micromobility services, but also for identifying external factors that could be an opportunity for further improving the operation of the systems, but also it could be threats and could be a barrier for these systems. Also, we conducted a travel time study, a travel time analysis for seeing the potential of shared scooters to attract a large amount of trips within the city of Palermo. So why we selected Palermo? Palermo is a real interesting case study since it can be characterized as a successful micromobility city. There is a great demand for these services, and that's why big companies from around the world have launched in this city. Also, the local authorities are promoting this service and with the aim to form a multimodal system and to combine it with public transport. However, as in every city, micromobility services have also created some issues that are being reported by the citizens. So in this slide, you can see the main points of the SWOT analysis that we conducted, which was based on previous studies in the city of Palermo, on reviewing the sustainable urban mobility plan of the city, and also based on contacts with local experts. As I said before, the main strength of these services are the suitability for the first and last mile of trips, and therefore the potential of enhancing multimodality. Also, it is a mode that it can be easily ridden and parked due to the dockless nature, and also there are important benefits for the society since it is an eco-friendly mode and energy efficient. And as on a whole, it can be characterized compatible with the smart cities model. On the other hand, an important disadvantage of these services is that they cannot address the needs of all citizens. For instance, of those of older age or families. Also, there is a dangerous coexistence with vulnerable road users, since in many cases e-scooters circulate in pedestrianized areas or on sidewalks. And another issue is that the rapid expansion of the system does not allow the users and the local authorities the appropriate time to adapt. Also, there are some external negative implications due to the short life cycle of the vehicles. This is something that is related with the phenomenon of vandalism, and also due to the operational costs of the micromobility providers. However, there are important opportunities, for instance, the increase in fossil fuel costs or the government subsidies, and of course, the rapid evolution of technology which can assist in making shared scooters safer. Of course, we have to take also into account the threats for preventing them, and some of the most important is the non-trained scooter users, the rise in the cost of electricity, and also the presence of non-certified vehicles. Going on to the second part of our analysis, this is the travel time analysis. Here we see a table from a previous study that compares e-scooter travel time with walking time. And we see how e-scooters can be much faster comparing to walking. We tried to go deeper in this comparison by drawing isochronous and isolines for seeing what part of the city can be served within a certain time threshold. We selected 3 different points within the city of Palermo along the Via Maqueda street, which is one of the oldest streets and most popular also. And here you can see the results of the travel time study. On the left side for walking and on the right side for e-scooters. The first thing that we identify is that, of course, e-scooters can cover a much larger area comparing to walking, but of course this is something to a large extent expected. And the most important that we see, therefore, is that e-scooters can cover a great area of the city in less than 10 minutes. And this shows the great potential of e-scooters to attract a high percentage of trips and to alleviate traffic congestion. Concluding, we show that Palermo experiences a clear cultural change in mobility. There is a strong desire by the local authorities to promote micromobility and to integrate with public transport for forming a multimodal system. This is also reflected in the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan of the city. But also the residents and the tourists were greatly attracted by these services. And it seems that Palermo is an ideal city for micromobility. From our travel time analysis, we proved the great potential of the city to attract, of these scooters in the city to attract a large percentage of daily trips and therefore to reduce motorized vehicles, motorized trips. But at the same time, there are important barriers that need to be overcome as this was revealed by our SWOT analysis. So what we propose, first of all, a holistic plan from the side of the local authorities with a clear focus on preventing safety issues and eliminating irregular use, for instance, irregular parking. But at the same time, actions from the national governments, for instance, to keep incentivizing electromobility and specifically micromobility, and to establish procedures for micromobility vehicles certification and standardization. This is something also very important. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm here to listen to your comments or your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nikiforiadis, for not exceeding the time, first of all. Your presentation is very, very comprehensive. Are there any questions? Yes, Professor Dapuzzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you also for the presenter for this very interesting presentation on the e-scooter. Just a curiosity, are you planning to, or have you used data that could be provided by the e-scooter provider? Obviously, I'm referring to some anonymized data on the e-scooter use that provider can, have and can share with you, or are you planning to use this data for your further research development? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your comments and for your question. Indeed, this would be very interesting to analyze those data. The issue here is that almost in all cases, these companies are very strict with this issue and they are not so keen on sharing data. But of course, if this data would be available, it would be very interesting to analyze them and see how micromobility systems and micromobility vehicles operate within the city. It would be an important source of data for further investigating this topic.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you both. Are there any other questions? Okay.
No.
Sorry?
No, I think there is not other question.
Okay. So, thank you again, Dr. Nikiforiadis. Now we can proceed to the third presentation, and I would like to ask my colleague, Professor Kabisi, to chair the session from now on. And at this point, I would like to express my thanks and gratitude to Professor Kabisi because she was the initiator for this workshop. So thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you too, to be the chair of the first part. We can continue with our workshop cycle with the third presentation. And I invite my colleagues Vincenza Torrisi to share the screen and share the research title Modeling of Intersection between Pedestrian and Vehicular Traffic to Promote Active Mobility, a microsimulation within San Benedetto neighborhoods in Cagliari, Italy.
Okay, thank you, Tiziana. Thank you all. Please confirm me if you see the presentation in full screen.
Yes.
Now it's okay.
And if I move to the second slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's better.
Again, I'm Vincenza Torrisi from University of Catania. And with this presentation, we got to introduce this work, which is a joint work between the University of Catania with me and Professor Matteo Ignaccolo, the PhD students Antonio Barbagallo, which is connected with us from University of Catania, and Pierfrancesco Leonardi, and the University of Cagliari with Professor Chiara Garau. I would like to thank Chiara for the organization of the second edition of the PhD course titled Smart and Sustainable Cities, which involved doctoral students from several Italian universities, and the work is one of the many research products that derived from this course. So this is the outline of the presentation. I will start with a focus on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to foster sustainable mobility in urban centers. Then I will introduce the methodological approach, which is based on a structured procedure with two main steps that I will describe in detail. I will focus on the case study application, and finally I will provide some conclusion and implication for further research. So our research derives from the combination of several important goals, and in line with the 11 goals, it is fundamental to promote sustainable cities and communities. In fact, we know that urban centers are still characterized by high motorization rate, and there are several strategies to foster sustainability. We know the redevelopment of urban spaces, the promotion of soft mobility, and also the transition from a car-oriented to a human-centered vision. Also at the national level, we have got the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, which considers the decarbonization as a key for the recovery of the country post-COVID, and also to make cities more sustainable. Therefore, after the pandemic, it is necessary to carry out a reconversion of urban spaces to encourage pedestrians to take advantage of urban space while respecting social distance. So we need to plan for promoting soft mobility, and in this case we present a methodology that helps during the planning process through a simulation tool. Administrator and transport planner must analyze different design alternative and also evaluate the appropriate scenario. So simulation modeling allows to calculate quantitative and both qualitative key performance indicators and to compare and evaluate the best scenario. So some of the advantages of the simulation are obviously the convenience in terms of time, resources, and costs if we compare it with in-field experiments. We have also the possibility to compare different strategies and scenarios, and also to better understand the phenomenon. We can also repeat the experimentation under controlled variation of the variables in order to perform sensitivity analysis. But it is important to choose the appropriate mathematical model to be used. And in this case, the microsimulation that we choose allows to model the interaction of the single pedestrian both with infrastructure and with vehicles. So in this direction, this study proposes a methodological approach for analyzing the interaction of pedestrian with other traffic components through a microsimulation model. We use the simulation software vSim with the integrated vSwalk module, and it has been possible to carry out an accurate analysis of the analyzed road intersection, perform the scenario evaluation, and also calculate several KPIs. The methodological framework is characterized by two phases. The first one is constituted by the model reconstruction. So in this phase, we identified the study area. Then we modeled the transport supply characterized by links, node, and priority rules. And the transport demand by modeling vehicular and pedestrian traffic flows. While the second phase is represented by the scenario evaluation through the computation and assessment of several indicators related both to vehicles and pedestrians. So the methodological approach has been applied to the case study of San Benedetto neighborhood in Cagliari. San Benedetto is a district of the city of Cagliari located in the east part, and it is provided with all the necessary services. And the analysis presented in this paper consisted of a microsimulation of pedestrian crossing located in Dante Alighieri Road near the intersection with San Benedetto Square. And the choice to model this crossing is motivated by the fact that it is characterized by high pedestrian transit and at the same time by an intense interaction with other traffic components, private vehicle, public transport, and also bicycles. So for this purpose, to model the state of our referred to March 2022, an online survey has been carried out using Google Street View to detach the number and width of road lanes, the travel direction, the dimension of pedestrian crossing and sidewalks. Then the transport demand has been modeled, and furthermore, two different traffic regulation conditions have been identified. So several scenarios have been simulated. A first step of the analysis has been to model the current state of the pedestrian crossing, simulating that pedestrians give priority to vehicles before entering the crosswalk, as we can see in the first picture on the left. The second modeled condition requires vehicles to give priority to pedestrians during the crossing. And finally, the analysis focusing on the effect that would occur assuming to narrow the pedestrian crossing and widening the sidewalk, suppressing one of the two vehicle lanes and diverting the traffic flow only to one. We can see this situation, the picture on the right. So the table shows an example of the results of the simulation performed for the crossing. The outputs that have been taken into consideration for the research study are the pedestrian density, the pedestrian speed and travel time of the crossing, the level of service relating to both pedestrian and vehicular traffic, and in addition, emissions associated with private traffic and public transport have been estimated. In our case, they have been calculated with the cohort model, which allows to estimate the emission values of CO and OX and VOC. So these graphs represent a comparative analysis of the obtained results for all simulated scenarios. The graph relating to the level of service shows that with low pedestrian flows, the level of service is constant and equal to A. And the situation is different in scenarios with the pedestrian priority rules and increasing pedestrian flows. The level of service is lowered to level C, and the worst results is obtained when the case is narrowed by eliminating a private traffic lane, when the level of service assumes the value F. And by observing the second graph, so the graph related to the total emissions, it is approximately the same trend as the graph of the level of service, since in correspondence with the low pedestrian flow, a low level of emission is estimated. And similarly, when priority is given to pedestrian, there is an increase in emissions. And with the same demand flows, the increase in emission appears to be more significant in the scenario with the narrowing crossing and a single private vehicular lane. And from the analysis of the pedestrian density, it emerges that with a pedestrian flow of 200 pedestrians per hour, it is observed a linear decrease in density. The 400 pedestrian hour curve shows a similar trend, but with higher values. And as for pedestrian speed, there are slightly higher speed values in scenarios with 200 pedestrian per hour. And in the case in which priority is given to vehicles, a low speed value is found. Then also by making the improvements in terms of road geometry, the pedestrian speed decrease, and this is due to the reduction to only one lane and therefore to a worsening of the condition of private traffic, which consequently also affect the pedestrian transit. So they are both correlated. So, in conclusion, this paper has proposed a methodology for evaluating the interaction between pedestrian and vehicular traffic through the implementation of a microsimulation model. And also by inserting detailed input data, it has been possible to simulate the behavior of road users in different alternative design scenarios, varying both the transport supply and the mobility demand. It allows the calculation and analysis of indicators such as the level of service, emission, pedestrian density. So we considered several parameters, both linked to the performance of the road and environmental aspects. If we can consider a limitation, the limitation of this simulation approach is the need of in-field measurements related to the transport demand to obtain results for operational scenario assessment. And in-depth analysis of the research work moves in this direction, which will foresee the extension of the study area and the modeling of the behavior of different categories of pedestrian, so men, women, elderly people, and child, and also deep data for to model the real transport demand. Just to conclude, I would like to thank the project, the relevant national project Wikitransit, which supported this research. In addition, I would like to thank again the organization of the PhD course on smart and sustainable cities, and I'm looking forward for the third edition. I also present you our special issue on transport mobility in a changing world, survey application, sensors, and automatic data collection method, where I'm a guest editor with my colleagues. And so please feel me to contact for further detail, and I inform you about the possibility to have a discount. Here there are our contacts, and I thank you very much, my colleagues, for the collaboration, and I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Ansa, for your presentation and your details. Any question?
I hope to be in time.
Yeah, I have just a curiosity. Do you use hypothetical scenarios or you collect real data set?
Well, as regard the transport supply, we realized the survey, so we represent in first scenarios the real geometry of the study area, and we just make some differences in terms of traffic regulation, so vehicle priority rules and traffic flow inputs. While as regard the demand, we put several steps of vehicular traffic flows and pedestrian flows in order to make a sort of sensitivity analysis. And we also modeled sort of modal shift by decreasing the vehicular flow. If we want to convert this methodological framework in an operational tool for administration, we have to collect real traffic demand in order to model the real behavior at this intersection.
Okay, thank you, Ansa. There are any questions? Okay. I think that we can continue.
Thank you.
I introduce another research. The title is an analysis of the integration of DRT services with the local public transport in post-pandemic periods. Some of the preliminary insight in the Italian context. I invite my colleagues Elena Cocuzza to share the screen.
Yes, just a moment. I try.
The author of this research are myself,
Yes.
Antonino Canale, Matteo Ignaccolo, Elena Cocuzza, and Nazam Ali.
Just a moment. Now you can. Do you see my presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Just a moment. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Tiziana, for the introduction. I am Elena Cocuzza. I am a transport researcher of the Department of Civil Engineering and Architecture of University of Catania. Also, Enza Torrisi is my colleague. And I present this work that focuses on analysis of the current state of affairs, starting from the literature and the regulation concerning the diffusion of demand-responsive transport system in Italy, and offer some ideas for the optimization in order to integrate public transport service. The passenger transport and mobility sector has undergone a major transformation in the last decade. This has been caused not only by the technological developments that have improved or created new services, but also by different trends in transport demand, for example, different modal choices. And the recent pandemic, even more so, the recent energy crisis has highlighted a change in a travel choice. Italy was one of the first countries in Europe which was severely affected by COVID-19
I'm sorry, Elena,
pandemic.
we
Yes?
see only the first slide.
Ah, yes. Okay, now?
Okay.
Yes.
Now it's okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. And several critical issues emerged during the different pandemic phases, especially in the health and mobility sector. Restriction on public transport reduced the supply of transport, highlighting the need to rethink complementary transport system. Among the mobility services that could be included as complementary to collective transport are the demand responsive transport system. That is optimal transport services in smaller cities with low population density or in areas characterized by population dispersion or area not served by traditional public transport services. It's a flexible mode of transportation that adapts to the demands of user groups and aim to offer a high-quality service closer to the needs of users, thanks to customization, comfort, and a journey time of no more than 13 minutes. This service can also be carried out with small vehicles, offering dedicated services and equipment for the transport of disabled people. Since May 2020, in the post-lockdown phase, the provision of local public transport has been based on ordinary services, such as bus services, which are mainly intended to meet the need of systematic travel between the place of residence and work on main development routes of the territory. These services have undergone reduction both in the onboard capacity and, in some cases, the complete elimination of transit routes. The rebalancing in favor of sustainable mode of transport and the reduction of the share of road mobility is pursued through the encouragement of ad hoc measures aimed to balancing off the supply-demand mechanism, improving the quality of services. The application of a on-demand responsive transit system has the ability to improve the transit needs in order to reach the place where personal family services are provided or to enjoy the results distributed within desired territory. In Italy, since March 2020, new areas of weak demand for transport have been created. For example, areas with a certain number of users that need to be transferred to and from places that have generally never had access to public transport. The demand-responsive transport system is therefore used in both urban and suburban areas, allowing even those who do not have their own means of transport. The idea of demand-responsive transport has developed since the 1970s. In Italy, it was a call transport dedicated to specific user group or specific area. Among the first experience, for example, there are replacement of regular services by shared taxis, application of a dial-a-ride system based on telephone calls to report demand to local public transport providers. Other experience have focused on-call services for people with reduced mobility, and in this case, often community-based and provided by volunteers. However, the concept of demand-responsive transport was formulated in the USA at the beginning of the 19th of the last centuries as a solution to the rising disaffection of potential users, in particular during the night. In fact, starting the gradual introduction of increasingly efficient information and telecommunication technology began, that to which services take on a greater level of automation and efficiency. demand responsive transport becomes an opportunity to offer public transport in area with low demand and for special purpose service. The implementation of innovative solutions has definitively changed the traditional concept of public transport, and several projects in Europe and also in Italy on demand responsive transport services in rural and peripheral areas and project pilots have been carried out. For example, the Kutsu Plus, a pilot project launched in Helsinki in 2012, or the Via Van in London, in Amsterdam, in Berlin. Another pilot project was the Sampo project, the system for advanced management of public transport operation. In this line, we can see some European program that launched some projects. And in Italy, the evolution we have this project that is in progress. The research project of national relevance 2017, the Wiki Transit project, Wiki Demand Areas Innovative Transport Share Services for Italian Town. This project, within which this study was partially conducted, sees the creation of test pilots in some cities of Sicily, Catania and Palermo, and Sardinia, Cagliari, and focuses on innovative shared mobility system for areas with low demand. For this project, we collaborate with Chiara Garau of the University of Cagliari, the University of Palermo, the University of Enna, with Tiziana Campisi. I'm sorry. This is the service management scheme were unbalanced between private and public demand responsive transport operators, and the role of the public authority is to find the right balance between these two transport operators in order to avoid conflicts and integrate all the different mobility offers in the best possibility way. Instead, the success of the demand responsive transport is based on the coexistence of technology and services evolution. Therefore, in this figure, you can see the three main pillars related to the technological developments. The evolution of demand responsive transport in Italy was launched. These services was launched in Italy in the late 1990. On-call public transport services consists of using a flat or small public transport to allow for personalized transfer based onto the requests of the user with origin and destination choose each time, managing the concatenation of the path with a certain level of flexibility to be able to satisfy all requests. As regards the services promoted by local administration, in synergy with the services manager, it's possible to compare three different situations corresponding respectively to a small city, medium-large city, and a metropolis. We, in this study, choose three different case studies. Vimercate, that is a small city located in Lombardy, near Milan, that has a small population. Like a medium-sized city, we choose Spoleto in Umbria. It's a historical center. And for the metropolitan ambit, we analyzed the city of Milan. Vimercate The implementation of demand responsive transport services took place in an experimental way from 9th to 17th, from February 2020 to July 2020, with a minivan and activation of a permanent services from September 2020 with 2 minivans. On 2021, a frequencies of about 216 was reached 300 passengers a week. But the important fact is that they are a new user of the public services who previously had no alternative to the private vehicle, a service defined by users as fast, useful, and efficient. The main benefits of this research are the reduction in the use of private vehicle, complementary services to transport, public transport, optimal function of the services, sample control of stop and waiting, sample travel reservation via the free app. But the main critical issue are that service is not accessible to a woman with wheelchair disabled, bus forbidden to children, and it cannot be booked outside the Vimercate area, and means easily recognizable by the logo. The second case study is Spoleto, medium size. Here has been the CAL bus services guarantees from Monday to Saturday for 8 hours a day, with the possibility for the elderly over 65, for civil invalids, for the disabled with a companion, and for people with reduction autonomy and additional transport services. Each user has only one trip per week to the municipality of Spoleto, Giano, Castel Ritaldi, and Campello. That you can see the localization of this area here. This is Spoleto, and this is Giano, Castel Ritaldi, and Campello. The main benefit is the reduction also in the first case of the private vehicle services for weak users and booking throughout the week and partially free services. But the critical issues is the services limited limited to certain segment of the population, absolute the limitation of the services just for one trip for week.
Elena, please summarize your presentation.
Okay.
We have a few minutes.
Okay. This is a case study of Milano with was launched the service called Neighbor Radiobus, and the services was utilized the taxis, especially during the night. I go directly to the discussion. The analysis of national case studies and transnational projects allow us to highlight that in the recent years, there has been a growing sensation according to which conventional public transport is inflexed and underlined as well as vehicle for contagion. The growing urban expansion has meant that in some cases, conventional public transport has become impracticable. Public authorities show a growing interest in on-demand transport as a means to address the inclusion of some specific target groups. The demand responsive transport services contribute significantly to decongestion the road, allowing the travelers to easily and simply reach the main fixed line on public transport. And through the multimodal approach to transport, on-car transport affects the quality of the road network and all that derive from it. The main benefits, in our opinion, is that these services is excellent complementary solution to the public transport services, even in the post-pandemic phase, and the creation of a digital platform can contribute to the improvement of modal choices and the use of the demand-responsive transport. In the other hand, the main critical issues are that shared transport services with high variable travel times may become unsuitable for serving as a connecting service to public transport center in urban areas. There is also a certain difficulty in modeling and optimization the routing processes of these services. Some of these complexities arise from the difficulty of predicting behavioral responses to delayed services of customer no-show. This hampered inclusion of demand transport in the standard public transport offered. Very few European projects and pilot projects concern the use of demand services for the tourism. Concluding, the one-call system could expand into delivery of goods as additional source of income. Online booking could make on-call transport more convenient for the general public, but not for the socially motivated on-call services target audience. And in Europe, there is potential to use on-call transport in orbital journey in suburban and peri-urban areas. A greater diffusion of the services in the city compared to the context of small rural center or village or even suburban. And it would be appropriate potential for transportation in the night economy. It would be better paying greater attention not only to passenger transport but to combine passenger freight transport. Finally, the demand responsive transport systems must be seen not only as a more environmentally friendly means of transport, but rather as a strategy for social inclusion and socio-economic development of local communities. Thanks all for the attention.
Thank you, Elena.
Yes, just a moment.
Okay. We think that we can continue because it's late. I know.
Yes, I'm sorry, but I have in this moment another call.
Okay.
Thank you. For any question, you can ask to Tiziana.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Bye.
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 We can continue with the no virtual presentation of Ines Ciarradi. Ines, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. We have 5 minutes. Please summarize your presentation.
Can you see?
Yeah, you can start. I want to show the last presentation. The title is an holistic approach to sustainable urban mobility plan strategies and action in the post-pandemic and energy crisis era. I invite Ines Ciarradi to start.
Okay. Hello, thank you for being here today. So my name is Ciarradi Ines. I'm a research master degree student from the Haya Institute of Transport and Logistics from Tunisia. Today I will present our research paper named the Holistic Approach to Sustainable Strategies and Action in the Post-Pandemic and Energy Crisis Era, elaborated by Dr. Tiziana Campisi, Professor Giovanni Tesorieri from the University of Napoli, Italy, and by myself and my supervisor, Professor Khaled bin Abdallah from the Haya Institute of Transport and Logistics of Sousse, Tunisia. So let's start by the outline of this work. So first of all, I will present the introduction, then the objective of this study. Then I will explain the evolution of the strategies introduced by the sustainable urban mobility in the era of the COVID pandemic and the energy crisis. Then I will explain the literature review. And finally, I will present the discussion and the conclusion. So the COVID-19 pandemic disturbed the demand and the mobility pattern. So the cities around the world take emergency actions to rebuild and maintain urban mobility. So when we talk about infrastructure, we don't talk about only transport infrastructure, but either energy and digital infrastructure. So these actions will generate a very strong impact on the agenda 2030 in the 2030 agenda. So the actual situation about the energy crisis generated by the situation of the conflict and the Ukraine create a shock in all the fronts and accelerate the European Green Deal when we try to obtain net zero in 2050. So this situation of managing the crisis require emergency actions, either in the short term and the long term. So short-term actions are represented by the sustainable urban mobility planning, and the long-term actions are represented by the sustainable development goals. So the objective of this study, first of all, we analyzed the literature of the last 2 years with regard to transport demand and mode choice. And in the second part, we compared these results with the action implemented by planner and politician. So, as we see here, that the evolution of the strategies introduced by the sustainable urban mobility in the era of the COVID pandemic and the energy crisis. So we talk about the sustainable urban mobility. This means that we are improving the urban area. So when we try to focus on the literature about the last 2 years, we found that is divided in 3 parts. The first part of research paper talk about urban infrastructure design. So we found that there is a paper talk about urban characteristics, urban parks or parklets, or development of pedestrians and bike lane. So the third part of research are talking about new trends in urban mobility. So the new trends, some research paper talk about promotion of active and shared mobility and public transport, and others talk about the change of travel habits. The third part is the strategic planning for the sustainable urban mobility. Some paper integrate the health security in the planning of the sustainable urban mobility. So in this figure, we try to summarize the challenges and the results about the sustainable urban mobility. Here we found that the COVID-19, the energy crisis, the climate change, the smart technology are challenging the planning of the sustainable urban mobility, which is composed by 2 parts, either the travel behavior and the policy, the public policy. Here we found that the traveler need to make choice about public transport, micro-mobility, soft mobility, taxi, private car, shared mobility, and that's depend on the context of the city, if it is developed country or in a developed country. And in the next part, we see the public policy, which contain actions, measures, taxes, subvention. So we see that there is a sort of interaction between travel behavior and public policy, which is represented by the infrastructure or either the transport mode or the services. Then when we talk about the results, we try to obtain by the planification of urban mobility. We see that we have some short objectives and other long-term objectives. So the resilience and the renewable energy and other type of solutions are classified as a short-term result, but the sustainability or the sustainable development goals are classified as a long-term objectives. So here, let's see the short video. see in this short video, so we used to live in the normal life. The COVID 2020, he changed our travel behavior. So we feel fear about crowded places, about public transport, etc. So the user try to choose a personal transport and avoid public transport. So here's some example of changing of travel behavior. We choose micro mobility, soft mobility, private car. In the next part, we see that the public policy I try to planify a solution or measures to take part of this changing of travel behavior. Under this, the traveler choose the health, the security, and transportation. We see here the public policy, for example, planifying parklets, etc. So this table summarizes some research paper talking about mobility user trends. So, for example, the first article remarked that there is a reduction of travel distance. There is the low-income people are more likely to use public transport. So his data is based on local agency in the South Korea. The second research paper from Vegas in 2022 remarked that there is a reduction of bus and train use and there is an increase of walking activities. His research is based on survey elaborated in Greece. The third article for Jekyll and all in 2022 remarked that there is an overall decrease in mobility except for residential, and there is a reduction in traffic and accidents. His study is based on local agency and Google Mobility report in Qatar. The next one is Power and all in 2021. He remarked that there is a reduction in non-essential travel, and all the people tend to travel, tend to not travel. His study is based on a survey in India. So let's move to the next part of the literature review, which is public policy aspect. Here we see that public policy measures in all of the research paper we have studied are divided in four parts. The first part, public policy that promotes the use of public transport. The second one is to encourage the deployment of low carbon transport modes. The third part is to promote walking and cycling. And the next part is to limit the use of private motorized car. Here we see another table that summarizes some type of purpose of measures. Then when public policy planify and measure, there is definitely a purpose for that. So the first purpose is public health. Some type of actions we see in Mexico City, they planify 17 kilometers walkway implemented, and there is in Quebec, Montreal, Canada, an active and family street. The second purpose is equity. We see that in South Carolina, USA, there is CARTA allows rights to use expired passes, and in Oregon, Portland, USA, there is TriMet opens a virtual application for low-income power program. And the third purpose we take as an example here is the public engagement. As we see in Ile-de-France, there is collaboration services to smooth demand and peak hours. So finally, we see that the COVID-19 pandemic has led to change in our travel choices, in our perception of travel use. There is more trends in walking, cycling, and private car use. As a result, policymakers have to limit car dependency and promote active mobility more. They have to decarbonize transport and mobility, reduce green gas emissions. We have to rethink the design of urban planning throughout, for example, the design of 15-minute cities. Although we have to integrate new services modes such as mobility as a service and prioritize the provision of bicycle lanes and pedestrian sidewalk. We talk about infrastructure and implementing of a new way. We have also to invest in strategies Internet of Things, IoT, then promote the concept of smart cities based on artificial intelligence. And finally, we have to include renewable alternatives and implementation of new charging in the energy strategies to avoid the situation of crisis generated by the conflict in all the Ukrainian world. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ines, for your presentation. Any questions? Okay. I think that we can.
Sorry, we have a question from here.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah, I thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you have considered, and also it was here for the last presentation. I'm sorry, and I was wondering if you have considered also the fact that the dispersion settlement can impact on the necessity of more mobility.
Would you repeat the question?
Okay, no. The fact that poor people are more likely using public transport, by the way, people, and on the contrary, rich people can use personal mobile. Yes. And maybe if there is also a consideration about the dispersion of the settlements, so dispersive and detached houses, rich houses are more likely to use private transport. Yes. And there is also, I was wondering if there is also this kind of consideration in related to planning. Yes. Maybe have you made it?
Yes, okay. Here we talk about equity in transport, in public transport, on the whole system of transport. We have to work more on the multimodality. Then we use soft mobility than other public transport. So we need to focus generally on the equities, the equity of the system. We choose a sustainable solution, okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Are there other questions?
From here, no.
Okay. I think that we can conclude this cycle workshop. I want to thank to all speakers and also chair, and I hope to have new and strong cooperation in the next future. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We can conclude, and I want to thank you all. See you on the next year, another workshop. And bye-bye. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Bye all.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Come si fa a entrare?
Qual è la sessione? Dopo. Sempre romano.
Sempre romano.
Sì, gosto di zero.
Facciamo così. Facciamo così. Toccato un punto nevralgico.
Ok. Sembra che la stessa.